The tears streaming down Katherine Davis's face glistened in the harsh Texas sunlight as she stood trembling upon the wooden auction block, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. It was 1875 in Willow Creek, and the crowd of men gathered before her hollered and jeered, calling out bids for her purchase as though she were cattle. Only 3 days ago, she had been a free woman traveling west with dreams of teaching in a frontier town before bandits attacked her stagecoach, killing the driver and taking her captive to sell into servitude. $200 for the schoolmarm, shouted a red-faced man with tobacco-stained teeth. $250, countered another, his eyes roving over her torn dress with undisguised hunger. Katherine closed her eyes, willing herself to disappear from this nightmare. Her parents' faces flashed in her mind. They had begged her not to leave Boston for the dangerous Western territories. Now she would never see them again. $500, called a deep voice from the back of the crowd. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up in surprise. 500. Well now, gentlemen, we have ourselves a serious bidder. The crowd parted as a tall man in a worn leather duster stepped forward. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but Katherine could see a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. Dust clung to his clothing, suggesting he'd ridden hard to reach the town. "Do I hear 550? The auctioneer called, looking around eagerly. Silence fell over the crowd. $500 was an extravagant sum, more than most of these frontier men could afford to pay. Sold. The auctioneer banged his gavel with finality. To the gentleman in the back. Katherine's purchaser approached the platform, his spurs jingling with each step. As he came closer, she saw eyes the color of a summer sky studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and a small scar cutting through his right eyebrow. He paid the auctioneer, who handed him a bill of sale and the end of the rope binding Katherine's wrists. "Come along," he said, his voice low and commanding. Katherine had no choice but to follow him through the dusty street as curious onlookers stared. Her tears continued to fall, leaving dark spots on the dirt beneath her feet as they walked. The man led her to a hitching post where a magnificent chestnut stallion stood waiting. He secured her rope to the saddle before addressing her directly for the first time. "You can stop crying now," he said, his voice softening unexpectedly. He pulled a knife from his belt and Katherine flinched, but he merely cut the bindings from her wrists. "My name is Ethan Armstrong." "I'm not what you think." She stared at him in confusion as he continued. "Dry them tears, wife. You're free now." Katherine blinked. "Wife, sir, I don't understand. It's for appearances," he whispered, glancing around to ensure no one could hear. "I've been tracking these illegal auctions for months. The only way to get you out safely was to buy you, but you're free to go wherever you please once we're away from here." Hope flickered within her for the first time since her capture. "You're not keeping me." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "No, madam, though we'll need to maintain the ruse until we're clear of town. Too many eyes watching. Why would you help me? $500 is a small price for doing what's right," he finished, helping her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold tight. We've got a ways to ride before nightfall." As they rode out of Willow Creek, Katherine felt the warmth of his chest against her back, solid and reassuring. For a stranger who had just spent a fortune to rescue her, Ethan Armstrong remained remarkably calm and focused. She didn't know if she could trust him yet, but for now she had little choice. They traveled in silence as the town disappeared behind them, replaced by rolling prairies dotted with scrub brush and the occasional juniper tree. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and distant rain. "There's a creek about an hour ahead," Ethan said eventually. "We'll make camp there for the night." Katherine tensed. "Mr. Armstrong, while I appreciate your assistance, you have my word as a gentleman that you'll be safe," he interrupted, seeming to understand her concern. "I meant what I said about you being free. Then why call me wife?" "Because a man traveling with an unmarried woman would raise suspicions. Those men back there, they might follow if they think I cheated them of their entertainment." The brutal honesty of his statement made Katherine shudder. "How did you know about the auction?" "I've been working with a U.S. Marshall named Jenkins to break up these rings. They've been operating throughout the territory, kidnapping women travelers and selling them to the highest bidder. His voice hardened. It's despicable work, but lucrative for the criminals involved. And you just happened to be there when I was being sold? Not exactly. There was hesitation in his voice. I received information that a stagecoach had been attacked and a passenger taken. I've been tracking them for 2 days. Katherine fell silent, processing this information. Part of her wanted to believe this stranger was her savior, while another part remained wary. Men in her experience rarely did something for nothing, especially not something costing $500. When they reached the creek, Ethan helped her dismount, his hands strong but gentle on her waist. The touch, brief as it was, sent an unexpected tingle through her body that she immediately tried to dismiss as a reaction to her ordeal. "I'll see to the horse," he said. "There's a canteen in my saddlebag if you're thirsty." Katherine gratefully retrieved the water, drinking deeply. She watched as Ethan cared for his stallion with practiced efficiency, removing the saddle and brushing him down before securing him to graze for the night. "You must be hungry," he said, approaching with a small bundle. "It's not much, just jerky and hardtack, but it'll keep you going until we reach my ranch tomorrow." "Your ranch?" "About half a day's ride from here. It's a safe place where you can rest and decide what you want to do next." He handed her the food and began gathering wood for a fire. "If you're still set on teaching, there's a town nearby that's been looking for a schoolteacher." Katherine studied him as he worked. His movements were economical, a man accustomed to taking care of himself in the wilderness. Despite her situation, she found herself curious about him. "Why do you care so much about stopping these auctions, Mr. Armstrong?" His hands stilled momentarily. "My sister," he said quietly. 3 years ago, she was traveling to visit me when her stagecoach was attacked. By the time I found out and started searching, it was too late." The pain in his voice was unmistakable. "I'm so sorry," Katherine whispered, after Elizabeth. "After I buried her, I swore I'd do whatever I could to stop it from happening to anyone else." He struck a match and the small fire came to life, casting flickering shadows across his face. "I was too late for 5 other women before you, but not this time." Katherine felt tears welling again, but for a different reason. "Thank you," she said simply. They ate in companionable silence as night fell fully around them. The stars emerged, brilliant and uncountable in the clear western sky. Katherine had never seen such a spectacular display in Boston, where city lights and smoke dimmed the heavens. "It's beautiful," she murmured, gazing upward. "One of the few benefits of being out here," Ethan agreed, following her gaze. "Makes a man feel small, but in a good way. Reminds you that your troubles are just a tiny part of something much bigger." His words surprised her. This rough-looking cowboy had unexpected depth. "You should get some rest," he said, spreading a bedroll near the fire. "You can have this, I'll keep watch." "You're not sleeping? I'll doze a bit later, but first watch is mine." He patted the revolver at his hip. "Just in case our friends from town get any ideas." Katherine wanted to argue but found exhaustion overtaking her. The events of the past few days crashed down upon her like a physical weight. She settled onto the bedroll, watching as Ethan took up a position with his back against a tree, facing outward toward the darkness. "Mr. Armstrong." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "Ethan, what happens tomorrow?" He turned slightly, his profile illuminated by the firelight. "Tomorrow we reach my ranch. You get a proper meal, clean clothes, and time to think about what you want, whether that's continuing west, returning east, or—" He paused. "Or finding a place nearby. It's your choice, Katherine. Your life is your own again." She nodded, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and uncertainty. Freedom was what she wanted, yet the future suddenly seemed vast and intimidating. "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered, closing her eyes. As sleep claimed her, Katherine's last conscious thought was that for a man who had spent $500 to rescue a stranger, Ethan Armstrong asked remarkably little in return. Morning came with the chattering of birds and the gentle sound of water flowing in the creek. Katherine woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came flooding back. She sat up quickly, looking around for Ethan. He stood by the creek, washing his face in the clear water. He'd removed his duster and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing muscular forearms tanned by the sun. Katherine found herself watching the way the water droplets caught in his dark hair before he pushed it back from his forehead. Sensing her gaze, he turned and nodded. "Good morning." "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," she admitted, rising to her feet and attempting to smooth her rumpled dress. The garment was torn in places and stained with dirt and sweat from her captivity. She felt suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "The water's cold but clean if you want to freshen up," he offered. "I'll see to breakfast and the horse." Katherine gratefully took the opportunity, moving downstream a little for privacy. She knelt by the water's edge, scooping the refreshing liquid onto her face and neck. The cool touch revived her, washing away some of the fear and despair that had clung to her since the stagecoach attack. She did her best to tidy her appearance, pinning up her fallen hair and rinsing the worst of the stains from her dress. It was a futile effort, but it made her feel marginally more human. When she returned to their camp, Ethan had coffee boiling in a small pot over the rekindled fire. He handed her a tin cup of the strong brew along with more hardtack. "We'll reach the ranch by midday," he said, sipping his own coffee. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, will see that you get whatever you need: food, bath, clothing." "You have a housekeeper?" Katherine asked, surprised. A brief smile crossed his face. "Don't sound so shocked." "I may be a cowboy, but I'm not completely uncivilized." "I didn't mean to imply. I'm teasing you, Katherine," he said, his blue eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "Mrs. Abernathy came with the ranch when I bought it 3 years ago. She was the previous owner's widow and had nowhere to go. She stays on, keeps the place in order, and makes sure I don't survive solely on coffee and jerky." Katherine found herself smiling back, the first genuine smile since her ordeal began. "She sounds like a sensible woman." "She is, tough as saddle leather but with a heart to match." He drained his cup and stood. "We should get moving. The sooner we reach the ranch, the sooner you can begin to put this behind you." They packed up quickly, and soon Katherine was once again seated in front of Ethan on his stallion, traveling across the expanding prairie as the sun climbed higher. Despite the circumstances, she found herself appreciating the wild beauty around them: rolling hills covered in grass that rippled like water in the breeze, wildflowers adding splashes of color to the landscape, and in the distance, the purple shadows of mountains against the horizon. Ethan was quiet for much of the journey, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks or tell her about the land they were passing through. His deep voice rumbled against her back, and Katherine found the sound oddly comforting. "That ridge up ahead marks the boundary of my property," he said eventually. "Armstrong Ranch begins there and stretches about 10 miles eastward. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's good land with plenty of water." As they crested the ridge, Katherine gasped at the vista before her. A verdant valley spread out below, with a silver ribbon of river winding through it. Cattle dotted the landscape, and in the distance, she could see a cluster of buildings surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. It was like something from a painting, the quintessential Western ranch she had only read about in books. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It is," Ethan agreed, pride evident in his voice. "Took everything I had to buy it, and twice as much work to make it profitable, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the ranch house, Katherine could see it was larger and more substantial than she had expected. Built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides, it spoke of permanence and care, not the rough bachelor quarters she had imagined. A woman emerged from the house as they rode into the yard, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 60, with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun and a face that had seen its share of sun and hardship. "Mr. Armstrong," she called. "You're back earlier than expected and with company, I see." Ethan dismounted and helped Katherine down, keeping his hands on her waist a moment longer than necessary, as though ensuring she was steady on her feet. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Katherine Davis. She'll be staying with us for a while." The older woman's eyes swept over Katherine, taking in her bedraggled appearance with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Of course," she said briskly. Come inside, dear. You look like you could use a hot bath and a decent meal. Before Catherine could respond, a man emerged from one of the outbuildings, tall and lanky with a weathered face that broke into a grin at the sight of Ethan. Boss, didn't expect you back so soon. Everything go all right in town? Well enough, Frank, Ethan replied. This is Miss Davis. She had some trouble on the road and will be our guest for a time. Frank tipped his hat respectfully. Madam, welcome to Armstrong Ranch. Catherine nodded in acknowledgement, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the normality of the scene after the terror of the auction block. The contrast was jarring, like stepping from a nightmare into daylight. Come along now, Mrs. Abernathy said, taking Catherine's elbow. Let's get you settled. Catherine glanced back at Ethan, who gave her a reassuring nod. Go on. I need to see to some ranch business, but I'll be in for supper. Mrs. Abernathy will take good care of you. The housekeeper led Catherine into the ranch house, which was surprisingly comfortable inside. Solid furniture, woven rugs, and even a few paintings adorned the main room. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, currently unlit in the summer heat. This way to the bath, Mrs. Abernathy said, leading her down a hallway to a small room at the back of the house. A copper tub stood ready, and the housekeeper immediately began pumping water into a large kettle to heat on the small stove in the corner. I'll find you some clean clothes while the water heats, she said. They'll be a bit big, but better than what you're wearing now. Then you can tell me what sort of trouble brought you here with Mr. Armstrong. He saved me, Catherine said simply, not yet ready to relive the details of her capture and the auction. Mrs. Abernathy studied her face for a moment, then nodded as though she understood perfectly. He's a good man, our Mr. Armstrong. Comes across rough sometimes, but he's got a sense of right that doesn't bend for anybody. While the water heated, Mrs. Abernathy brought Catherine a simple dress of faded blue cotton. This belonged to Elizabeth, Mr. Armstrong's sister, she explained. He keeps her things in a trunk, never could bring himself to get rid of them. Catherine touched the fabric gently. He told me about her, what happened. The housekeeper's face darkened. A terrible business, nearly destroyed him when he found out. He searched for months, but when he finally tracked her down. She shook her head. Well, some men would have broken completely. He turned it into purpose instead. Once the bath was ready, Mrs. Abernathy left Catherine to soak in blessed privacy. The hot water eased aches she hadn't even realized she had. And as she scrubbed away the grime of her ordeal, Catherine felt as though she were washing away more than just dirt. With each pass of the cloth over her skin, the fear and helplessness of standing on that auction block seemed to diminish. Dressed in Elizabeth's clean clothes, with her hair washed and combed, Catherine felt reborn. The dress was slightly large, but not uncomfortably so, and Mrs. Abernathy had provided a belt to cinch the waist. When she emerged from the bathing room, the housekeeper had a meal waiting: fresh bread, stew, and coffee. Catherine hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma hit her, and she ate with an enthusiasm that made Mrs. Abernathy smile approvingly. Nothing like a good meal to restore the spirits, the older woman commented. Now, while you eat, I should tell you about the sleeping arrangements. There's a small room off the kitchen that used to be mine before I moved to the cottage out back. It's yours for as long as you need it. That's very kind, Catherine said, but I don't want to impose for long. Mr. Armstrong mentioned there's a town nearby looking for a teacher, Cedar Ridge, about 10 miles west. They've been without a school teacher since last winter when Miss Perkins married the blacksmith and moved to Denver. Mrs. Abernathy refilled Catherine's coffee cup, but there's no rush to decide anything. Mr. Armstrong would want you to take your time, get your bearings. Catherine nodded, though inwardly she felt a restlessness. Being beholden to anyone, even someone as seemingly honorable as Ethan Armstrong, made her uncomfortable. Her independence had always been precious to her. It was why she'd left Boston in the first place, against her parents' wishes. The rest of the day passed quietly. Catherine helped Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of domestic work. It kept her hands busy and her mind from dwelling too much on recent events. As evening approached, Mrs. Abernathy prepared a more substantial meal. Mr. Armstrong and the men will be hungry after a day's work, she explained as she rolled out pastry for a pie. True to his word, Ethan returned at supper time, bringing with him the scent of horses, leather, and open air. He'd clearly washed up before coming inside, his face clean and his damp hair combed back. He stopped short when he saw Katherine at the table, his eyes widening slightly. "Miss Davis," he said, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. "You look recovered." Katherine felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "Thanks to Mrs. Abernathy's care," she replied, "and thank you for the loan of the dress." Something flickered in his eyes' recognition, perhaps grief, before he nodded. "It suits you better than it did sitting in a trunk." The meal was lively, with Frank and two other ranch hands joining them. The men shared stories of the day's work, discussing cattle, horses, and the approaching roundup with good-natured banter. Katherine found herself relaxing in their company, particularly when she noticed how Ethan ensured she was included in the conversation, explaining unfamiliar terms and asking for her opinions on various matters. After supper, the hands returned to their bunkhouse, and Mrs. Abernathy retired to her cottage, leaving Katherine alone with Ethan for the first time since their arrival. He invited her to join him on the porch, where two rocking chairs faced the valley now bathed in twilight. "How are you feeling?" he asked as they settled into the chairs. Truly, Katherine considered the question. "Like I'm in someone else's life," she admitted. "Yesterday I was merchandise on an auction block. Today I'm sitting on a beautiful ranch watching the sunset. It doesn't seem real." "The mind takes time to catch up to changed circumstances," Ethan said. "After Elizabeth, I'd find myself turning to tell her something, forgetting for a moment that she was gone. Reality has a way of slipping sometimes." They rocked in silence for a while, watching as the sky painted itself in brilliant oranges and pinks that gradually deepened to purple. Stars began to appear, first one by one, then in clusters until the heavens were ablaze with light. "I never imagined such skies existed," Katherine murmured. "In Boston, the stars never seemed so close. Out here, there's less between you and them," Ethan replied. "Makes a man feel both insignificant and part of something grand at the same time." Katherine glanced at him, struck again by the unexpected poetry in this rugged man. "You've thought about this a lot. Ranching involves plenty of night watches, gives a man time to think." He turned to look at her, his face half illuminated by the lamplight spilling from the window behind them. "Mrs. Abernathy tells me you're considering the teaching position in Cedar Ridge." "I am. It seems like Providence I came west to teach after all. It's a good town, small but growing, decent folks for the most part." He hesitated. "But there's no hurry to decide. You're welcome here for as long as you need." "You've already done more than enough, Mr. Armstrong." "I can't continue to impose on your generosity." "Ethan," he corrected gently, "and it's no imposition, this house." He gestured toward the door. "It was meant for a family. Elizabeth was supposed to live here too. Sometimes it feels too empty with just me and Mrs. Abernathy." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. He cleared his throat and stood abruptly. "It's getting late. You must be tired after everything." Katherine rose as well, oddly reluctant for the evening to end. "Yes, I suppose I am." He walked her to the door of her small room, hesitating at the threshold. "If you need anything in the night, my room is at the end of the hall. Don't hesitate to wake me." "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." He nodded, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary before he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Katherine closed her door and leaned against it, her heart beating unusually fast. There was something about Ethan Armstrong that unsettled her in a way that had nothing to do with fear. His quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, the way his eyes seemed to see through her polite facade to the turmoil beneath it, all combined to create a pull she hadn't anticipated. As she prepared for bed in the small, comfortable room, Katherine reminded herself firmly that her priority must be regaining her independence and continuing the journey she had started. Developing feelings for the man who had rescued her would be the height of foolishness, a classic case of confusing gratitude with something deeper. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, it was Ethan's face that filled her mind, not as he had appeared on the auction block, stern and commanding, but as he had looked on the porch, his features softened by starlight and something that might have been loneliness. The following days established a rhythm to life at Armstrong Ranch. Katherine quickly found ways to make herself useful, helping Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks and even taking over the bookkeeping when she discovered Ethan's ledgers were in disarray. Her teaching experience had included accounting, and she found satisfaction in bringing order to the ranch's financial records. Ethan seemed surprised but grateful for her assistance. "You have a knack for numbers," he commented one evening as they reviewed the newly organized books together. "I've been putting this off for months." "I enjoy it," Katherine replied. "It's satisfying to see everything balanced properly." Their shoulders nearly touched as they bent over the ledger, and Katherine was acutely aware of his proximity. The clean scent of soap mingled with leather. The way his hands, rough from ranch work, moved carefully across the pages, the occasional brush of his arm against hers sending unexpected warmth through her body. These moments of closeness were becoming more frequent as the days passed. Ethan would find reasons to seek her out to ask her opinion on a letter he was writing to a cattle buyer, to show her a new foal in the stables, to bring her wildflowers he'd found while riding the range. Each interaction felt charged with unspoken possibilities that both excited and frightened Katherine. A week after her arrival, Katherine joined Ethan for an evening ride around the property. Mounted on a gentle mare named Daisy, she followed him along the river that fed the valley, marveling at the beauty of the land as the setting sun gilded everything in golden light. "I never understood the appeal of the West, until now," she admitted as they stopped to let the horses drink. "In Boston, people speak of it as a savage wilderness to be tamed, but there's a different kind of civilization here, isn't there? One that works with the land rather than trying to conquer it." Ethan nodded, pleased by her observation. Most Easterners never see it that way. "They come with dreams of bending the land to their will and either leave broken or learn to adapt." "Which were you?" A smile tugged at his mouth. "A bit of both. I came from Pennsylvania with grand ideas and not much practical knowledge. First year nearly bankrupted me. Second year taught me humility. Third year, I finally started listening to the old-timers who'd been working this land for generations. And now I know enough to realize how much I still don't know." He looked around at his land with obvious pride. "But I'm learning, every day." As they rode back to the ranch house, side by side now, Katherine found herself studying Ethan's profile against the darkening sky. In the week she'd spent at Armstrong Ranch, she'd come to know him as a man of quiet integrity, fair with his workers, gentle with animals, and possessed of an unexpected thoughtfulness. He wasn't given to idle conversation, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. "I've written to the town council in Cedar Ridge," she said suddenly, breaking the companionable silence. "About the teaching position." Ethan's hands tightened momentarily on his reins. "I see. When did you do that?" "Yesterday." "Mrs. Abernathy sent the letter with one of your hands who was heading that way. And have you decided to take the position then?" Katherine couldn't quite read his tone. "Not yet. I wanted to inquire about the details first: the school, the accommodations, the salary." "It would be foolish to commit without knowing what I'm committing to." Ethan nodded slowly. "Sensible." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but the easy camaraderie of earlier had evaporated, replaced by a tension Katherine couldn't quite identify. When they reached the stables, Ethan helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Katherine," he said, his voice low, "you know you're not obligated to leave. If staying here would suit you better than teaching in Cedar Ridge, the offer stands." Their faces were close in the dimness of the stable, his eyes searching hers. Katherine felt her breath catch at the intensity of his gaze. "What exactly are you offering, Ethan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before he could answer, Frank's voice called from outside, "Boss." "Rider coming in," the moment broke. Ethan stepped back, his expression shuddering. "We should see who it is." They emerged from the stable to find a man dismounting from a lathered horse. He was middle-aged, with a neatly trimmed mustache and the unmistakable bearing of a lawman, despite his trail-worn appearance. "Marshal Jenkins," Ethan greeted him, extending his hand. "Wasn't expecting you, Armstrong." The marshal shook his hand firmly, got news that couldn't wait. Katherine hung back slightly, but Jenkins spotted her immediately. "This must be Miss Davis," he said, touching his hat respectfully. "Glad to see you safe, madam. I've been tracking those bastards, pardon my language, since they took you." "Marshal Jenkins has been my contact in breaking up the auction rings," Ethan explained to Katherine. "He's been working these cases officially while I've been less official." "Come inside," Katherine offered. "You look like you could use some coffee, Marshal." Once seated at the kitchen table with steaming cups before them, Jenkins got to the point. "We caught the rest of the gang that took Miss Davis. 3 of them holed up in a cabin about 40 miles south, put up a fight, but we got them." "Dead?" Ethan asked. 1, 2 are heading for trial." Jenkins sipped his coffee. "But that's not why I rode out here. Thing is, one of them talked. Seems this ring is bigger than we thought, with connections in several territories, and they're not happy about losing merchandise and having their operation disrupted." Katherine flinched at being referred to as merchandise, and Ethan's hand moved to cover hers briefly on the table. "What are you saying, Jenkins?" he asked, though his grim expression suggested he already knew. "I'm saying they know it was you who bought Miss Davis and took her instead of." "Using her as intended." The marshal's eyes flicked apologetically to Katherine. "And they know you've been interfering in other auctions. They've put out word that they're looking for both of you." A cold knot formed in Katherine's stomach. "They're coming here." "Not likely to this ranch. Specifically, they don't know where Armstrong lives, but they have descriptions of both of you, and there are men looking. I thought you should know." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Appreciate the warning. We'll be careful." They discussed precautions for a while longer before Jenkins stood to leave, despite offers to put him up for the night. "Best if I'm not seen here too long," he explained. "Less connection between us, the better." After seeing the marshal off, Ethan returned to find Katherine still at the kitchen table, her face pale. "I've put you in danger," she said quietly. "By being here?" "No," his voice was firm. "I put myself in danger long before you came along by choosing to fight these men. You're not responsible for any of this. But now they're looking for both of us." Ethan sat across from her, his expression serious. "Katherine, I won't lie to you. This complicates things, but Armstrong Ranch is remote and my men are loyal. You're safer here than anywhere else right now." "What about Cedar Ridge? The teaching position?" He hesitated. "It might be best to wait on that, at least until Jenkins has had more time to round up the rest of this gang. Cedar Ridge is more public, more exposed." Katherine nodded slowly, processing this. Part of her was terrified at the thought of men hunting for her, while another part felt strangely relieved to have a reason to delay her departure from the ranch from Ethan. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We go on living," Ethan replied simply, "but carefully, no trips to town for a while. I'll make sure the hands know to be alert for strangers, and I'll take extra precautions when I ride out." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I won't let anything happen to you, Katherine, I promise." The warmth and strength of his grip was reassuring, and Katherine found herself holding on tightly. "I believe you," she said, surprised to find it was true. That night, Katherine lay awake long after retiring to her room, her mind churning with the day's revelations. The danger posed by the auction ring was frightening, but equally unsettling was the growing awareness of her feelings for Ethan. In just a week, he had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Their near moment in the stable played over in her mind. What would have happened if Frank hadn't interrupted? What had Ethan been about to say? And most troubling of all, what did she want him to say? Sleep eventually claimed her, but her dreams were troubled by faceless men pursuing her through endless prairies, and a tall figure on horseback always just out of reach. The following weeks brought changes to life at Armstrong Ranch. Security measures were implemented. Men rode in pairs when checking the herds, an extra hand was assigned to night watch, and all visitors were viewed with suspicion until their business was confirmed legitimate. Despite these precautions, life continued. The roundup commenced, keeping Ethan and his men busy from dawn until dusk, gathering cattle from the far reaches of the property. Katherine found herself taking on more responsibilities in his absence, not just with bookkeeping but with overseeing daily operations of the ranch house, and even helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare meals for the tired cowboys at day's end. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Katherine stood on the porch watching the men return from the range. Dust clouds announced their approach long before she could make out individual riders, and she found herself searching instinctively for Ethan's familiar silhouette. Mrs. Abernathy joined her, wiping her hands on her apron. "They'll be hungry as bears tonight," she commented. "Roundup always works up an appetite." "Everything's ready," Katherine assured her. "The stew has been simmering all afternoon, and the bread just came out of the oven." The older woman gave her an approving nod. "You've taken to ranch life quicker than I would have expected for a city girl." "I've always been adaptable," Katherine replied, though privately she wondered if it was ranch life she had adapted to or simply life with Ethan. As the riders drew closer, Katherine could finally distinguish Ethan at the head of the group, tall and straight in the saddle despite what must have been an exhausting day. Her heart quickened at the sight of him, a reaction she had stopped trying to suppress. The men dismounted in the yard, handing their horses over to the young stable hand who came running to meet them. Ethan approached the porch, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. His face was streaked with dust and sweat, but his smile when he saw Katherine was enough to make her breath catch. "Successful day?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Very. We've gathered most of the North Range herd. Another day or two should finish it." He glanced toward the door, from which the aroma of stew was wafting enticingly. "Something smells good." "Katherine made the stew today," Mrs. Abernathy informed him with a hint of pride. "And the bread I just supervised." Ethan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Is that so?" Katherine felt herself blushing under his gaze. "It's nothing special, just a recipe Mrs. Abernathy taught me." "I'll be the judge of that," he said with a smile that contained something warmer than mere appreciation for a home-cooked meal. Dinner that night was a jovial affair, with the cowboys in high spirits after their productive day. Katherine found herself the recipient of lavish compliments on the meal, which she accepted with gracious modesty while secretly pleased. After the hands had departed for the bunkhouse and Mrs. Abernathy had retired, Katherine and Ethan found themselves alone in the kitchen. She was washing the last of the dishes while he dried, a domestic arrangement that had become their evening ritual whenever he was home for supper. "You've changed," Ethan observed as he carefully wiped a plate. Katherine glanced at him, surprised. "Have I?" "When you first came here, you were like a bird with a broken wing, hurt and wary, ready to fly away the moment you could." He placed the dry plate on the stack. "Now you move around this ranch like you belong here." "Is that a problem?" "Not at all." He took the next wet dish from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. "It suits you, this life, more than I would have expected for a Boston school teacher." Katherine considered this as she scrubbed the last pot. "Perhaps I was never meant to be just a Boston school teacher. My parents certainly thought I was making a terrible mistake coming west." "And what do you think now?" She looked up at him, finding his blue eyes studying her intently. "I think that sometimes life takes unexpected turns and the path you end up on isn't the one you set out to travel. But that doesn't mean it's the wrong path." Ethan set down the towel and moved closer, close enough that Katherine could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "And this path, the one that led you here," her heart was pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "I'm beginning to think it might be exactly where I'm supposed to be." For a moment, they stood frozen in the quiet kitchen, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Ethan slowly raised his hand to her face, his calloused fingers gentle as they brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Katherine," he said, his voice deeper than usual, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly without thinking about gratitude or obligation." She nodded, unable to look away from his intense gaze. "Are you staying at Armstrong Ranch because you feel safe here from those men or because you want to be here with me?" The directness of the question took her breath away. In Boston, such forthright discussion of feelings would have been considered shockingly inappropriate. But this wasn't Boston, and Ethan Armstrong wasn't the kind of man to dance around important matters. "Both," she admitted quietly. "I do feel safe here." But that's not why I wake up each morning looking forward to seeing you at breakfast, or why I stand on the porch watching for your return every evening. Something shifted in his expression, relief, perhaps, or joy in his hand moved to cup her cheek fully. I've been fighting this, he confessed. Telling myself it wasn't right to have these feelings for a woman who came to me in distress, who might be confusing gratitude with something else. I know my own mind, Ethan, Katherine said, finding courage in his honesty, and my own heart. What I feel for you has nothing to do with the auction block or your rescue. It's about who you are, the man I've come to know these past weeks. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, sending shivers down her spine. And who am I, Katherine Davis, in your eyes, a man of honor? Of kindness and strength, a man who sees me, truly sees me, not as someone to be protected or possessed, but as a partner. She took a deep breath. A man I could love if given the chance. The last words hung in the air between them, bold and irrevocable. For a heartbeat, Katherine feared she had been too forward, had misread the situation entirely. Then Ethan closed the remaining distance between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with weeks of pent-up longing. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as her hands moved to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength beneath his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since I saw you come out of that room wearing Elizabeth's dress, looking like you belonged here. Katherine smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his collar. Why did you wait so long? Because I needed to be sure that it was real for both of us. His expression grew serious. I don't take this lightly, Katherine. What's between us? If we start this, I'm not looking for something temporary. Neither am I, she assured him, her heart full to bursting with emotions she had never expected to feel, certainly not in these circumstances. He kissed her again, more briefly this time, before stepping back slightly. It's getting late. We should probably… Yes, Katherine agreed reluctantly, though neither of them moved immediately. Finally, Ethan took her hand and led her to the door of her room, where he placed a final, lingering kiss on her lips. Good night, Katherine. Good night, Ethan. She closed the door behind her, leaning against it with her fingers pressed to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. Whatever uncertainties the future held, the threat from the auction ring, the question of her teaching ambitions, the challenges of ranch life in this moment, Katherine was certain of one thing. She had found something precious and unexpected in the arms of Ethan Armstrong, something worth fighting for. The following days took on a dreamlike quality for Katherine. Outwardly, life at the ranch continued much as before the roundup was completed, the cattle sorted and counted, everyday tasks attended to with the same diligence. But beneath this routine flowed a current of joy that transformed even the most mundane activities into occasions for happiness. Ethan found excuses to touch her throughout the day, a hand at the small of her back as they passed in the hallway, fingers brushing as he handed her a cup of coffee, a brief kiss stolen in the pantry when Mrs. Abernathy wasn't looking. Each contact sent thrills through Katherine's body, making her feel more alive than she had ever been in Boston's proper drawing rooms. Their evenings on the porch became treasured times, the two of them talking long into the night about everything and nothing, his hopes for the ranch, her dreams of teaching, memories of their childhoods, books they had read, places they hoped to see. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, her hand held securely in his larger one. I received a letter today, Katherine said one such evening about 2 weeks after their first kiss, from the Cedar Ridge Town Council. Ethan's hand tightened slightly around hers. About the teaching position? Yes, they're very interested in my qualifications and have offered me the position starting with the fall term. She turned to gauge his reaction in the fading light. They need an answer within the month. His face remained carefully neutral. I see, and have you decided what to answer? Katherine hesitated. Despite their growing closeness, they hadn't directly discussed what it meant for her future plans. I thought perhaps we should talk about it, together. Katherine, Ethan said slowly, I would never presume to make this decision for you. If teaching in Cedar Ridge is what you want, I wouldn't stand in your way. That's not what I'm asking, Ethan. She shifted in her chair to face him more directly. I'm asking what you want. What place you see for me in your life? He was quiet for so long that Katherine began to worry she had misunderstood everything between them. Then he stood abruptly, pulling her to her feet as well. Come with me, he said, leading her down the porch steps and out into the yard. Where are we going? Just to the rise. I want to show you something. They walked hand in hand through the twilight to a small hill overlooking the ranch. From this vantage point, the main house, outbuildings, corrals, and nearest pastures spread out below them, peaceful in the gathering dusk. When I first bought this land, Ethan said, his voice quiet but intense, I had a vision of what it could be, not just a successful cattle operation but a home, a place where a family could grow and thrive. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. After Elizabeth died, I thought that dream had died too. I threw myself into the work, into hunting down the men who took her, and told myself it was enough. Catherine's heart beat faster at the raw emotion in his voice. Then you came into my life, he continued. Standing on that auction block, brave despite your fear, and something woke up inside me that I thought was gone forever. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket. I've been carrying this for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. In the fading light, Katherine could just make out a small object in his palm, a ring, its gold band catching the last rays of the setting sun. It was my mother's, Ethan explained, his voice roughening with emotion. I had Frank ride to the bank in Tucson to get it from my safety box there. Katherine's breath caught as understanding dawned. Ethan, I'm not offering you a position as a rancher's wife, Katherine. I'm offering you a partnership. His blue eyes held hers steadily. This land, this life, I want to share it with you, build on it together. And if teaching remains your passion, we can find a way to make that work too. Cedar Ridge isn't far, or perhaps, eventually, there will be enough children right here at Armstrong Ranch to need a teacher of their own. Tears welled in Katherine's eyes at the implications of his words, at the future he was envisioning for them together. I'm asking you to marry me, Ethan said simply. Not because I rescued you or because you need protection, but because in these weeks together, I've come to love you for exactly who you are, your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love watching you with Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen, seeing you work through the ledgers with that little furrow between your eyebrows, hearing you laugh at Frank's terrible jokes. He took a deep breath. I love you, Katherine Davis, and I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me. Katherine felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, Ethan Armstrong, I will marry you. His face broke into a smile of such joy that it transformed his usually serious features. With hands that trembled slightly, he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as though it had been made for her all along. Then he pulled her into his arms, his kiss filled with promises of the future they would build together. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, the stars had emerged fully overhead, witnessing their commitment to each other. We should go back, Katherine said reluctantly. Mrs. Abernathy will wonder where we've disappeared to. Ethan kept his arm around her waist as they walked back toward the house. She won't wonder too much. She's been dropping hints about wedding plans for at least a week now, Katherine laughed. Is there anything that escapes that woman's notice? Very little, Ethan admitted. She knew how I felt about you before I did, I think. As they approached the house, they could see Mrs. Abernathy's silhouette in the kitchen window, busy with evening tasks. The lamp behind her cast a warm glow that spilled onto the porch, welcoming them home. The word echoed in Katherine's mind with new significance. This place that had been her refuge was becoming so much more the foundation of her future, the setting for the life she would build with Ethan. When shall we marry? She asked as they climbed the porch steps. As soon as you're ready, Ethan replied. Though there are some preparations to make, I should write to your parents for one thing. Katherine grimaced slightly. They may not approve. They had rather grand plans for me to marry a Boston lawyer or banker. Then I'll just have to convince them that a Wyoming cattle rancher is an acceptable substitute. He kissed her forehead. Though I suspect they'll be more concerned with your happiness than my profession. Before they could enter the house, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both tense. Ethan immediately pushed Katherine behind him, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip as he peered into the darkness. "Who's there?" he called sharply. "It's Jenkins," came the reply, and moments later the marshal rode into the yard, his horse lathered and blowing hard from hard riding. Ethan relaxed slightly but didn't release his grip on his weapon. "You're riding late, Marshal," Jenkins dismounted quickly. "Needed to reach you as soon as possible." He glanced at Katherine, noticing her position partially sheltered behind Ethan. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" "Anything you have to say can be said in front of Miss Davis," Ethan replied firmly. "We're to be married." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Katherine felt a thrill at hearing him announce their engagement so decisively. Jenkins nodded. "Congratulations to you both." "But I'm afraid my news isn't celebratory." He lowered his voice. "We caught another member of the ring yesterday. During questioning, he revealed that they know Armstrong Ranch is where Miss Davis has been staying. They're planning to hit the ranch, possibly as soon as tomorrow night." Katherine felt cold fear wash over her, eclipsing the joy of moments before. "How many?" Ethan asked, his voice hard. "At least 6, maybe more. Led by a man named Harlan Briggs, mean bastard with a particular grudge against you for disrupting his business." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I know the name. He's behind several of the auctions I broke up. He's dangerous, Armstrong. Killed 3 men that I know of, probably more." "What are you suggesting?" Jenkins sighed heavily. "Ordinarily, I'd say we gather a posse and set a trap for them here. But I'm stretched thin with men out tracking other members of the ring. I can't get enough deputies here by tomorrow night. So we're on our own," Ethan concluded grimly. "Not entirely. I can stay, and I've sent for additional federal marshals, but they won't arrive for at least 3 days." Jenkins looked between them. "My recommendation is that you get Miss Davis somewhere safe until this is over." "No," Katherine said immediately, stepping forward. "I won't run and leave Ethan to face these men." "Katherine," Ethan began, concern evident in his voice. "This is my home now, too," she said firmly. "Our home. I won't be driven from it by fear." The 2 men exchanged glances, and Katherine could see a mixture of pride and worry in Ethan's eyes. "Very well," Jenkins conceded, "but we need to prepare. How many men do you have here, Armstrong?" 5 hands, counting Frank, all good with rifles." "That gives us 8 fighting men, counting Mrs. Abernathy," Katherine added, earning surprised looks from both men. "What? I've seen her with a shotgun. She's quite formidable." Despite the gravity of the situation, Ethan's mouth quirked in a brief smile. "That she is." He turned serious again. "We should move inside, make plans. Frank will need to be informed so he can alert the other hands." The remainder of the evening was spent in preparation. Frank was summoned, weapons checked and distributed, defensive positions assigned. The ranch house, with its thick log walls and strategic positioning, would serve as their primary fortification. Throughout the planning, Katherine remained steadfast, refusing to be relegated to a purely defensive role. "I can shoot," she informed them. "My father insisted all his children learn, even his daughters. He said a proper Boston lady should be able to protect herself." Ethan looked as though he wanted to argue, but instead handed her a Winchester repeating rifle. "Show me." They set up an impromptu target in the yard, a tin can on a fence post. Katherine took careful aim and fired, knocking the can cleanly off its perch. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Ethan asked, clearly impressed. "Summer house in Vermont," Katherine replied, lowering the rifle. "Father had quite the collection of firearms. My brothers and I used to compete." Jenkins chuckled. "Looks like you've found yourself quite a woman, Armstrong." "So I have," Ethan agreed, his eyes meeting Katherine's with a mixture of pride and something deeper. By midnight, the plans were in place. Extra ammunition had been distributed, the hands informed and positioned in the bunkhouse and barn with clear lines of sight to the approach roads. Inside the main house, furniture had been moved to create defensive positions at the windows, and Mrs. Abernathy had filled every available container with water in case of fire. When the immediate preparations were complete, Jenkins suggested they all try to get some rest. "No telling when they'll come tomorrow. Could be dusk, could be midnight. Best to be rested." The marshal took the first watch, allowing the others to sleep. Katherine found herself unable to settle, however, her mind racing with fears and possibilities. Eventually, she slipped from her room and made her way to the kitchen for a glass of water. She found Ethan there, sitting at the table cleaning his revolver by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, his face softening at the sight of her. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. Katherine shook her head, pouring herself water from the pitcher. "Too much thinking." Ethan set aside his gun and held out his hand to her. When she took it, he pulled her gently onto his lap, his arms encircling her waist. Katherine leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair. "This isn't how I imagined our engagement evening." "It's not your fault," she assured him, "and we'll have many more evenings after this is over." His arms tightened around her. "That's a promise, but Katherine, if things go badly tomorrow." She placed her fingers against his lips. "Don't, we will get through this together." Ethan captured her hand, kissing her palm before looking into her eyes with intensity. "I need you to promise me something. If the worst happens, if it looks like they might breach the house, I want you to take the escape route we discussed. Mrs. Abernathy knows the way through the root cellar and out to the creek bed. You follow her and don't look back." "I won't leave you," Katherine insisted. "You must, these men. What they would do to you." His voice roughened with emotion. "I couldn't bear it." Katherine cupped his face in her hands. "And I couldn't bear to leave, knowing you were in danger. We faced this together, Ethan, as partners, remember." For a long moment, he seemed ready to argue further, but then something in his expression shifted recognition, perhaps, that her determination matched his own. "Together, then," he agreed finally, pulling her closer for a kiss that held all the urgency of their uncertain future. When they parted, Katherine rested her head against his shoulder, taking comfort in the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight they had this moment of closeness, of shared strength and commitment. "We should try to rest," Ethan said eventually, though he made no move to release her. "A little longer," Katherine murmured, unwilling to leave the circle of his arms just yet. They remained that way until the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, holding each other against the approaching storm. Morning brought no sign of the expected attackers, but the atmosphere at Armstrong Ranch remained tense with anticipation. The hands went about essential chores in pairs, rifles slung across their backs as they tended to livestock. Jenkins rode the perimeter, checking approaches and possible hiding spots, while Ethan reviewed defensive positions with Frank. Katherine and Mrs. Abernathy spent the morning preparing food that could be eaten cold if necessary, filling canteens, and tearing clean sheets into bandage strips, a precaution that Katherine prayed would prove unnecessary. By mid-afternoon, the waiting had stretched everyone's nerves taut. The hands rotated watch positions, vigilant for any sign of approaching riders. Inside the house, Katherine found herself jumping at small noises, her imagination conjuring danger from creaking floorboards and wind-rattled windows. "The waiting is often worse than the fight itself," Jenkins commented as he accepted a cup of coffee from her. "Gives a person too much time to think." "Is there any chance they won't come?" Katherine asked. "That your information was wrong," the marshal shook his head grimly. "Briggs isn't the type to make idle threats. If he said he's coming, he'll come." As evening approached, Ethan gathered everyone in the main room of the house for final instructions. His face was grave but determined as he outlined positions and signals. "If shooting starts, don't waste ammunition. Make every shot count, and remember these men won't hesitate to kill any of us, so don't hesitate either." His eyes moved to Katherine, softening slightly. "Stay low, stay covered, and if I give the order to fall back, do it immediately. No heroics from anyone." The sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the ranch yard. The day's heat gave way to the cool of evening, bringing with it a deceptive sense of peace that belied the danger they all knew was approaching. Katherine took up her position at a side window, the Winchester across her lap, watching as darkness gradually claimed the landscape. Beside her, Mrs. Abernathy sat with a shotgun, her weathered face set in determined lines. "Never thought I'd be defending this place against outlaws at my age," the older woman remarked dryly. Mr. Abernathy would be quite surprised. I think he'd be proud, Catherine replied, grateful for the housekeeper's steady presence. Time crept by with excruciating slowness. 9 o'clock came and went, then 10. By 11, the ranch was fully enveloped in darkness, with only the quarter moon providing faint illumination. The house remained dark as well, save for a single lamp turned low in the kitchen, away from the windows. Shortly before midnight, a low whistle from the porch Frank's signal alerted them to movement. Catherine tensed, her hands tightening on the rifle as Ethan moved silently to the front window. "Riders," he whispered. "At least 6 approaching from the east." Jenkins joined him, peering into the darkness. "They're being cautious, spread out, moving slow." Catherine's heart pounded in her chest, but her hands remained steady on the rifle. The weeks of fear since her capture, the uncertainty of her future, the joy of finding love with Ethan all seemed to converge in this moment of impending violence. "They're stopping at the edge of the yard," Ethan reported. "Looks like they're discussing something." A moment later, a voice called out from the darkness. "Armstrong, we know you're in there. Send out the woman and maybe we'll let the rest of you live." "That's Briggs," Jenkins murmured, recognized his voice. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, waiting. "Last chance, Armstrong." Briggs shouted again, "The woman for your lives." When no response came, a shot rang out, shattering a window on the far side of the house. It was followed immediately by more gunfire as the attackers opened up on the ranch house. "Return fire," Ethan ordered, and the defenders began shooting back at the muzzle flashes visible in the darkness. The next minutes were chaos, the crash of breaking glass, the deafening report of rifles, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the air. Catherine fired steadily at the shadowy figures moving in the yard, forcing herself to remain calm and remember her father's lessons about breathing and aim. Beside her, Mrs. Abernathy discharged her shotgun with a boom that seemed to shake the very walls, eliciting a cry of pain from somewhere outside. "Got one," the housekeeper announced grimly, already reloading. The initial exchange of fire seemed to last forever, but probably continued for only a few minutes before the attackers fell back to regroup. In the momentary lull, Ethan moved quickly from position to position, checking on his defenders. "Anyone hit?" he asked as he reached Catherine and Mrs. Abernathy. "We're fine," Catherine assured him, though her ears were ringing from the gunfire. "What about the others?" Frank took a graze to the arm, nothing serious. "Everyone else is holding." He touched her cheek briefly. "You're doing well. Remember to stay down." A shout from Jenkins drew their attention. "They're splitting up, some heading for the barn." "They're trying to flank us," Ethan said, moving quickly to the back window. "Frank, Joe, watch the rear approaches." The shooting resumed, more sporadic now but no less deadly. Through her window, Catherine could see 3 attackers using a water trough for cover as they fired at the house. She took careful aim at one who exposed himself briefly and squeezed the trigger. The man jerked backward, dropping his rifle. "Good shot," Mrs. Abernathy commented approvingly. Before Catherine could respond, a crash from the kitchen indicated someone had broken through the back door. Ethan and Jenkins immediately moved to intercept the intruder, guns ready. A burst of gunfire, a shout of pain, then silence. Catherine held her breath, terrified for Ethan, until his voice called out, "Clear, one down." Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived as more shots peppered the front of the house. A bullet splintered the window frame inches from her head, showering her with wood fragments. "They're making another push," Frank shouted from his position. The next minutes blurred together, shooting, reloading, the growing smell of gunpowder and sweat. Catherine lost track of how many shots she fired, how many times she ducked as bullets whistled through the room. Then, during a brief pause in the shooting, a new sound reached them: horses approaching fast from the west, many of them. "More of them?" Mrs. Abernathy asked worriedly. Jenkins moved to the window, listening intently. "No," he said after a moment, a smile breaking across his face. "That's a cavalry formation. The federal marshals must have ridden through the night to get here." Sure enough, moments later a commanding voice called out, "United States Marshals, drop your weapons." New gunfire erupted, but this time it was directed away from the house as the outlaws found themselves caught between the ranch defenders and the newly arrived lawmen. The shooting was intense but brief. "They're running," Frank reported from his window. "At least 3 of them heading east." "The marshals are in pursuit," Jenkins confirmed. "I think it's over." An eerie silence fell over the ranch, broken only by the distant sounds of the chase and the creaking of the house as it settled. Ethan moved cautiously to the front door, Jenkins beside him with gun ready. They stepped onto the porch, scanning the yard for any remaining threat. "Clear out here," called a voice from the darkness. "Marshal Davies, Federal Service. Anyone hurt in there?" "Some minor injuries," Ethan replied. "We've got at least 2 of them down in the yard, 1 inside." Katherine set aside her rifle with trembling hands, the reality of what they had just survived washing over her. Mrs. Abernathy patted her shoulder reassuringly before moving to light more lamps. Outside, the federal marshals were securing the scene, checking the fallen outlaws, organizing pursuit of those who had fled. Katherine moved to the doorway, needing to see Ethan, to assure herself that he was truly unharmed. He stood in the yard, conferring with Jenkins and a tall man in a marshal's badge. When he spotted her in the doorway, he excused himself immediately and came to her, taking her hands in his. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her voice shook slightly. "Just relieved it's over." Ethan pulled her gently into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "It's over," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "You were amazing, Katherine, brave as any man I've ever fought beside." She clung to him, drawing strength from his solid presence, her fear gradually giving way to profound gratitude that they had both survived. Marshal Davies approached them, touching his hat respectfully to Katherine. "Madam, Mr. Armstrong, looks like we got here just in time." "We're grateful for your arrival," Ethan acknowledged, keeping one arm around Katherine's shoulders. "Though I think we might have held them off regardless. My fiancée turns out to be quite the markswoman." The marshal's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he nodded approvingly. "Frontier women are a special breed. Congratulations on your engagement." "Thank you," Katherine replied, feeling strangely calm now that the danger had passed. "Will this be the end of it? The auction ring?" "Not entirely," Davies admitted. "Organizations like this have tentacles that reach far. But we've cut off the head tonight. Briggs was their leader in this territory, and he's among the dead. The rest will scatter, especially once word gets out that we're actively hunting them." Jenkins joined them, his face weary but satisfied. "I count 3 dead, including Briggs. 2 wounded who'll stand trial. At least 3 escaped, but the boys will track them down." "And our side?" Ethan asked. "Nothing serious. Frank's arm needs bandaging, and Joe took some glass in his shoulder, but everyone will recover." Jenkins glanced at Katherine. "You 2 should get some rest. It's been a long night, and tomorrow we'll bring paperwork and statements." As the marshals continued their work, Ethan led Katherine back into the house, where Mrs. Abernathy was already tending to the injured hands. The main room showed the evidence of battle-broken windows, bullet holes in walls, furniture overturned for cover, but the structure itself remained sound. "It can all be repaired," Ethan said, seeing Katherine's gaze move over the damage. "What matters is that everyone survived." "Yes," she agreed, suddenly overcome with exhaustion now that the danger had passed. She swayed slightly on her feet, and Ethan's arm tightened around her. "You need rest," he said gently, guiding her toward her room. "It's nearly dawn." At her door, he hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave her. Katherine felt the same reluctance, the same need to remain close after facing death together. "Stay with me," she whispered, propriety forgotten in the aftermath of violence. "Just to sleep. I don't want to be alone right now." In any other circumstance, such a request would have been scandalous, but tonight, after all they had endured, it seemed the most natural thing in the world. Ethan nodded, understanding without words. They lay together on her narrow bed, still fully clothed, his arms around her and her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. No words were necessary as exhaustion claimed them both, carrying them into dreamless sleep as the first light of dawn broke over Armstrong Ranch. The following days brought a flurry of activity to the ranch. The federal marshals established a temporary headquarters in the barn while they processed the prisoners and completed their investigation. Statements were taken, evidence gathered, bodies removed for burial in unmarked graves on the outskirts of Willow Creek. Katherine found herself recounting her original kidnapping multiple times, each retelling slightly easier than the last as the events began to take on the quality of a nightmare receding in the light of day. Through it all, Ethan remained by her side, a steady presence offering support without smothering her independence. At night, they continued to sleep in the same bed, finding comfort in each other's presence, though they maintained propriety otherwise out of respect for their yet-to-be-formalized union. 3 days after the attack, Marshal Davies announced that his men had captured the last of the escaped outlaws. "That's the end of Briggs' operation in this territory," he informed them over coffee in the newly repaired kitchen. "We've identified at least 20 women who were sold through their auctions in the past year alone. Some have been recovered, others." He shook his head grimly. "But no more." "What about other territories?" Katherine asked. Jenkins mentioned connections beyond Wyoming. "We're sharing information with law enforcement across the West," Davies assured her. "This kind of operation thrives on secrecy. Now that it's exposed, it will be much harder for them to operate. And the men who originally took me from the stagecoach, too, are awaiting trial in Cheyenne. One was killed during capture. They'll face justice, Miss Davis. I promise you that." After the marshals departed, taking their prisoners to face trial in Cheyenne, a sense of normalcy gradually returned to Armstrong Ranch. The broken windows were replaced, bullet holes patched, and the rhythm of ranch life reasserted itself. Katherine wrote a lengthy letter to her parents in Boston, explaining all that had transpired since her stagecoach was attacked. She told them of her rescue, of finding a home at Armstrong Ranch, and most importantly, of her love for Ethan and their plans to marry. She included a separate note from Ethan, formally introducing himself and requesting their blessing for the marriage. "Do you think they'll give it?" Ethan asked as they sealed the envelope for posting. "Eventually," Katherine replied with a small smile. "They may insist on meeting you first, which means either a very long journey for them or for us." "I'd like to meet them," Ethan said. "To thank them for raising such an extraordinary daughter, if nothing else." Katherine kissed him softly. "Flatterer. Simply stating facts, Miss Davis." With the immediate danger past, they turned their attention to wedding plans. Neither wanted a long engagement, especially after facing death together. 2 weeks, Ethan suggested. "Enough time to make proper arrangements, but not so long that something else can interfere." Katherine agreed readily. "A small ceremony here at the ranch." "Just the hands, Mrs. Abernathy, perhaps Marshal Jenkins if he can attend." "Are you sure? You don't want something more elaborate?" She shook her head, certain. "This is our home. There's nowhere else I'd rather begin our marriage." The preparations were simple but meaningful. Mrs. Abernathy helped Katherine alter one of her better dresses into a suitable wedding gown, adding lace from the housekeeper's own treasured collection. Ethan rode to Willow Creek to arrange for the circuit preacher to perform the ceremony, and returned with a gold band to accompany his mother's engagement ring. Katherine wrote to the Cedar Ridge Town Council, declining the teaching position with gratitude, but explaining that her life had taken an unexpected turn. She did, however, offer to provide occasional lessons at Armstrong Ranch for the children of the Hands and neighboring ranches until a proper school could be established in the area. The day before the wedding, a telegram arrived from Boston, her parents' response to their letter. Katherine opened it with trembling fingers, Ethan at her shoulder. "Letter received. Stop shocked by events. Stop relieved at your safety. Stop father and I departing for Wyoming next week. Stop expect U.S. month end. Stop reserving judgment on rancher. Until meeting. Stop." Mother Katherine laughed through sudden tears. "That's their way of giving tentative approval." "They're coming to meet you." "Well," Ethan said, looking both amused and slightly apprehensive, "I suppose I'd better make a good impression." "They'll love you," Katherine assured him. "Once they see how happy I am, how could they not?" The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September sky a perfect blue over Armstrong Ranch. Catherine dressed with Mrs. Abernathy's help, her heart full to bursting with joy and anticipation. "You look beautiful, child," the housekeeper said, adjusting the simple veil fashioned from fine netting. "Like you belong here." "I do belong here," Catherine replied, smoothing the skirt of her ivory dress. "More than I ever belonged in Boston drawing rooms." The ceremony took place on the front porch of the ranch house, decorated with wildflowers gathered by the hands that morning. Marshall Jenkins had ridden in the night before to attend, bringing with him a silver serving tray as a wedding gift. Catherine would remember little of the preacher's words later, so focused was she on Ethan's face as they exchanged their vows. He stood tall and proud in his best clothes, his blue eyes never leaving hers as he promised to love, honor, and protect her all the days of his life. "I, Katherine Davis, take you, Ethan Armstrong, to be my lawfully wedded husband," she recited, her voice clear and certain. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." As Ethan slipped the gold band onto her finger to join his mother's ring, Catherine felt a sense of completion, of rightness, that transcended the unusual circumstances of their meeting. From the terror of the auction block to this moment of pure joy, a journey she could never have imagined but would never regret. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Ethan's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, sealing their union before their small but appreciative audience. The hands cheered and whistled. Mrs. Abernathy dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, and even Marshall Jenkins looked suspiciously misty. The celebration that followed was simple, but joyous, a feast prepared by Mrs. Abernathy, music provided by Frank on his fiddle, dancing on the packed earth of the yard as the sun set over the mountains. Catherine moved from Ethan's arms to dance with Jenkins, with Frank, with each of the hands who had stood beside them against Briggs and his men, feeling embraced by this small community that had become her family. As twilight deepened into night, the party continued around the bonfire, but the newlyweds slipped away to the privacy of the main house, to the master bedroom that would now be theirs together. "Are you happy, Mrs. Armstrong?" Ethan asked as he closed the door behind them. "Completely," Catherine answered, reaching up to touch his face. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He drew her into his arms, his kiss deeper now, unrestrained by the presence of others. "I still can't quite believe you're mine." "Not yours," she corrected gently. "Yours with me." "Partners, remember." His smile was tender as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Partners in everything." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Catherine's head pillowed on Ethan's chest and his arms securely around her, she thought about the strange, winding path that had led her here. The attack on her stagecoach, the horror of the auction block, the stranger who had appeared to save her, all terrible events that had nonetheless brought her to this moment of profound contentment. "What are you thinking?" Ethan murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best," she replied. "If I hadn't been captured, if you hadn't been hunting those men, we would never have met," he finished, "though I wish you could have been spared that ordeal." "It's behind us now," Catherine said, pressing a kiss to his chest above his heart. "What matters is the future we build together." 10 months later, Catherine stood on the porch of Armstrong Ranch, watching as Ethan worked with a young colt in the corral. The June sun warmed her face, and she rested one hand on her swollen belly, feeling the baby within her shift and kick. So much had changed in less than a year. Her parents had indeed come to Wyoming, staying for a month at the ranch. Initial wariness had given way to genuine affection as Mr. and Mrs. Davis witnessed their daughter's happiness and came to know Ethan as the honorable man he was. They had departed with promises to return when their grandchild was born. The auction rings had been broken across 3 territories, according to Jenkins' last letter. Most of the men involved were either dead or in prison, and new laws had been enacted to more severely punish such crimes. It wouldn't end the practice entirely. Evil always found new forms, but it had become much more difficult and dangerous for those who would treat human beings as merchandise. Armstrong Ranch had prospered under their joint management. Catherine's education and accounting skills complemented Ethan's practical knowledge, and together they had expanded operations and increased profits. They had also established a small school for the children of their hands in neighboring ranches, with Katherine teaching 3 days a week in a converted outbuilding. Mrs. Abernathy emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Lemonade is ready, Mrs. Armstrong." "You shouldn't be standing so long in this heat, not in your condition." Katherine smiled at the older woman's fussing. "I'm fine, Mrs. Abernathy. The doctor said walking is good for me." "Walking, yes. Standing in the sun, no." The housekeeper shook her head disapprovingly. "That husband of yours would have my hide if he saw you out here without shade." As if hearing his name, Ethan looked up from the corral, his face breaking into a smile when he saw Katherine. He said something to Frank, who took over with the colt and made his way to the porch. "Should you be out in this heat?" he asked immediately, confirming Mrs. Abernathy's prediction. "Not you too," Katherine groaned, though she couldn't help smiling at his concern. "I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain." "Humor me," Ethan said, guiding her to the rocking chair in the shade. "I happen to treasure my wife and child." Mrs. Abernathy brought out a tray with lemonade and disappeared back into the house, leaving them alone on the porch. Ethan pulled the second rocker close to Katherine's and took her hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band on her finger. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed regularly, as though reassuring himself that she had no regrets. "Very," she assured him, as she always did. "Though I'll be happier when your son stops using my ribs as a punching bag." "My daughter, you mean?" Ethan countered with a grin. It was an ongoing debate between them, good-natured and filled with anticipation rather than preference. Katherine laughed, then winced as the baby delivered a particularly enthusiastic kick. "Either way, he or she has your stubbornness." "And your spirit," Ethan added, placing his free hand on her belly to feel the movement within. His expression softened with wonder, as it always did when he felt their child stir. They sat in companionable silence for a while, rocking gently and sipping lemonade as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The ranch hands were bringing in the herd for the night, dust rising from the hooves of hundreds of cattle moving across the pasture. "I had a letter from Jenkins today," Ethan said eventually. "They've captured the last of Briggs' associates. The ring is completely dismantled now." Katherine squeezed his hand, knowing what this news meant to him: closure, justice for Elizabeth and all the other women who had suffered. He also mentioned that the new territorial governor is establishing a special task force to prevent such operations from forming again. He's asked if I'd be willing to consult. "Will you?" Katherine asked, though she already knew the answer. "I told him I'd need to discuss it with my partner first," Ethan replied with a small smile. "It would mean occasional trips to Cheyenne, maybe Denver." "I think you should do it," Katherine said without hesitation. "Your experience could save other women from going through what I did." "What Elizabeth did?" Ethan nodded, his expression solemn. "That's what I thought too, though I don't like the idea of leaving you, especially now." "It won't be for long periods," Katherine reasoned, "and we have Mrs. Abernathy and the hands here. Besides, this little one isn't expected for another 2 months. Still," Ethan said, his protective instincts clearly warring with his sense of duty. "We'll manage," Katherine assured him, "and when I'm recovered from the birth, perhaps sometimes I could accompany you. Our child should know both the ranch and the wider world." This suggestion seemed to please him. "A family journey, I'd like that." As the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Katherine found herself reflecting again on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From the tears that had fallen on that auction block to this moment of contentment on the porch of her home, with her husband beside her and their child growing within her, a journey of terror and courage, of loss and discovery, of unexpected love blooming in the harshest of circumstances. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, echoing his question from their wedding night. Katherine smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her belly where their baby kicked strongly, as if in greeting. "I'm thinking that sometimes tears can water the seeds of joy," she said. and that I have never been more grateful for the day a cowboy told me to dry my tears, for I was free. Ethan leaned over to kiss her gently, his blue eyes reflecting the love that had grown between them through danger and peace, through struggle and triumph. "Not just free," he murmured against her lips. "Home." And as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky above Armstrong Ranch, Katherine knew that no truer word had ever been spoken.